Now that we've done some learning about how Android apps work, activities, views, and resources, it's time to get back to our Wikipedia project and start creating some of these activities and views. We've seen some of the ways Kotlin makes this process easy, but in our demo we'll be highlighting this even more. Let's start by creating our different activities using Kotlin. Then create the layout files for each activity and register our activities in the manifest so Android knows how to start them. We'll create views within our layout files, and of course we'll run our app. Let's move over to Android Studio and get things started. So now over in Android Studio, what we're going to do first before adding any sort of activities or views to our files is dig through our resources and very specifically take a look at our styles. And one thing we're going to add is a sub-style to our app theme here, and we're going to name that apptheme.noActionBar. This is because we're not going to be using the Android action bar in our application. Rather, we'll be using the new toolbar view provided by the Android support libraries. So let's go ahead and set some properties here, and what we're first going to do is add the window no title equals true, and this will remove the default title that creates the action bar, and then we're going to add another name, which is window action bar, and set that to false. So these two properties here are telling the Android system that when we have this theme, we want to have no action bar and no title. So now that we have our main theme open, we can take a look at some of the other options for creating themes, although we won't really need to dig into it here. But you can see we can open our editor and we get access to all sorts of themes for the different types of views that we have. So we can pick a theme, and we'll pick the app theme no action bar, and you can see that we were able to basically pick and choose different control themes that we want to be able to make changes to for the base of our application. So we can update properties on the right, view what the changes look like on the left, and actually edit some of these properties here, which is pretty neat. So we have our theme set up. Let's start creating our activities. We're going to need to create our very first main activity of our application. The first thing we're going to do is create a new package underneath our primary Java package and call this our activities. This is where we're going to put all of our activities that we create. So let's go ahead and hover over new, and in Android Studio we can see that there's a whole bunch of different options we have to add a new file. We can add a Java or Kotlin file or class right away, add a resource file, basically some of these raw ones, C++ files, image assets, etc. But what we're going to focus on here are these bottom options that expand with even more involved templates. So we can go ahead and pick from any of the default templates provided, or go over to the Android gallery where we can look at third-party and other Google ones in order to pre-create and pre-populate a lot of the necessary wire-up for creating an activity. Since our main activity is going to house our Explore view, our History view, and our Favorites view with that bottom bar for tabs, we should consider using the bottom navigation activity to create our basic main activity. So here we'll be able to fill out fields to name it, apply a name to the layout file that's going to be created with it, give it a hierarchical parent, which we won't need since this is going to be the initial activity in our application. Pick the package name where it's going to be, and that's going to be our activities folder, and then also select the source language. So we're going to make sure that this is Kotlin, not Java. So we can go ahead and hit finish here. We might see a pop-up dialog that we already have some images added. We can go ahead and proceed anyway. And from here we get a sync progress started due to our build starting from adding a new class. And we also get this nice little opening up to that layout file that was created. So this is an Android layout resource file, and this is the design view we saw earlier. From here we can see that we have some views for our tabs at the bottom, our bottom navigation view, and the text that's going to be changing here. So our Gradle sync has finished. Let's go over and look at what the code created that was output. We can hop over to our main activity, and we might see some errors here. We're going to see some red text over our R file, or our R reference more than likely, and we'll see some populated little dialog that shows up here where Android Studio detects that, hey, this is probably the R class from your generated project file. Do you want to add that? And so we're going to hit Alt-Enter and add a reference, and you can see that it imported what we needed. So we're going to be using that command quite frequently. We add references to different classes through our code. Make sure you save And then the last thing we're going to do is go over to the Android manifest. You can see that it added this activity property here. This is where we're going to be registering our activities in order to make them usable within our application. This is where Android has them registered so it knows where to find them when we try to move to them and start them, and to kick off the lifecycle within the Android operating system. However, there's two things we need to add here. We're going to need to create an intent filter here, which is going to say that this main activity is the launcher for our application. So we do that by adding an intent filter, and we'll use a lot of the autocomplete here as we go through it. We'll add an action and give it the name android.intent.action.main, and you might see that pop up in the autocomplete right away. Self-close that, and then there's one more thing we need to add, which is the category with the name of android.intent.category.launcher. So these two properties together tell the Android operating system by reading our manifest that this activity, our main activity, is the main action for opening our application, and it has a launcher intent. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and run our application by clicking the Run button, and from here we'll be able to see our different Android emulators that we can see, or physical devices if you have any plugged in. If you don't have any virtual devices or Android emulators, you can click this Create New Virtual Device here. This will bring you through a dialog that is pretty simple and easy to follow to help you create your Android emulators to fit the needs that you have. We're going to pick one that we've already created previously, called the Android Accelerated by 86, which is using the Haxum hardware accelerated virtualization so that we can have a faster and more efficient emulator. We can click OK and start running. So now in our application that's running in the emulator, we can see we do still have that default Android action bar, and this is because we didn't take the new theme we created and apply it to our application. We'll do that when we go back and add more activities and give them their themes. You'll also see that we have our bottom navigation view, and that selecting different items changes the main text. This is a good start, but we're going to take a deeper dive next module when we talk about fragments and using a fragment manager to change this active view and use the proper fading animations that best fit material design. So now that we've been able to use the great tooling from Android Studio to create our activity, let's do one from scratch. The next activity we'll need to create is the detail activity. This activity is going to represent our detail page for our Wikipedia articles. So rather than going through and clicking the Add Activity and picking one that best makes sense, we're going to go ahead and start with just the raw activity file. We're going to start with creating a Kotlin class. We'll call this Article Detail Activity. From here you can pick the different type of file that you want. To start with a basic template. In this case we'll pick class since we're creating an activity class. Hit OK, and this is our basic template here with a pre-existing comment with the author and date. Now what we need to do is add some inheritance and have our activity inherit from the app compat activity, just like our main activity was doing from the template. This app compat activity inherits from the Android activity with some extra features for backwards compatibility. You can do that by using the colon and then start typing in our class name and see some autocomplete. You can see that it automatically brought in our namespace. However, we do need to declare which constructor is going to be used to initialize it. In this case, we'll use the default constructor, which takes no parameters. The next thing we'll need to do is to create a layout file. Over on the left side, under the resource layouts, select New Layout Resource File. We're going to follow the same naming convention created by the template, and we'll call this Activity Article Detail. In this case, we'll just pick a linear layout. We'll select the main source set since this is where our code exists, and the directory name within resources is going to be layout since this is a layout file. We'll skip any of the additional qualifiers since we don't need these particular fields. Click OK, and this will open up the design view again. Our article detail page is going to need a web view. We can do this via text or via the designer. In this case, we're actually going to be stripping out the linear layout base and go with more of a frame layout. Since we're only going to be using a web view, we don't need to have the linear layout stack child views since we're only going to have one child view. From here we can do this manually since we're going through this whole process manually, and we can get the autocomplete to add a web view. Again, we'll need to automatically set the layout width and height to match parent, And we should also give this an ID so it's easier to reference in our Kotlin code through the auto mapping. We can do this by using the naming convention of @+ID, and then give it its name. The @ indicates which resource, or that we're going to be using a resource. Plus indicates that we're going to be adding it if it doesn't exist already, and then we pick the ID as the resource type. This tells the processor to add the ID of article detail web view if it doesn't exist already. We can actually self-close this web view since we're not going to be adding any child views. The next thing we need to do is assign this layout that we just created to map to our article detail activity. Back over to the Kotlin file, we can override the onCreate function. We'll select the override that just takes the nullable bundle saved instance state parameter. We will still need the super call here, and instead we're going to now call the setContent view and then get a reference to the layout file by calling r.layout.activityArticleDetail. And once again we'll pull in a reference to our R class that's been generated. And so now when this activity is created, it's going to set the content view to the layout from the resource class and find the article detail activity layout. You'll notice that we actually don't need semicolons with each of these calls, unlike Java or many other object-oriented languages. This is because the Kotlin compiler is intelligent enough to tell when your statements are meant to be separated and can do so with things such as line breaks, spacing, etc. The last thing we need to do is register this activity to the Android manifest. We can follow the activity that was created from our template and simply create it for our new article detail activity. We get plenty of autocomplete from the tooling, which is great to help us write this more quickly, so we can go ahead and hit enter to select the activities.article detail activity, and that's it. We don't need to provide any intent filters since we're not doing anything special other than starting this activity from the selection of a given Wikipedia page. So now to make sure that this works, let's go over to our main activity and add an event just to test something. We can get a reference to that message text view and add a onClickListener. In Java, we would have to create a new instance of the view.onClickListener class. However, in Android, we can actually use a new single which can pass in a parameter of a given type and do something with it. This is basically auto mapping overrides within listener classes to make these methods much shorter and quicker and easier to read. So here we know that we're setting an onClickListener, and we're going to map the onClick function to pass in a given view parameter and do something with it. We also get some auto suggestion where if this parameter view isn't used, to change it to an underscore. This allows the Kotlin processor to ignore this field when processing it. It also makes it readable when we need to have more parameters passed in through these listeners, and we only need to use very specific parameters within our custom code. So what we can do with this message on ClickListener is start the activity of our new article detail activity. We can create a new intent by simply calling intent, passing in a given Android context after we pull in the namespace. The Android context that's going to be creating this intent is this current activity, so we'll pass in this, and then we'll need to get a reference to our article details activity Java class underneath. We do that by calling the article detail activity, 2 colons, and then we get the auto suggestion here for the class.java. We can now go and update our application live on our emulator by calling apply changes or by rerunning it again. So now back in our main activity, we can go ahead and tap or click on the label and see that it kicked off a brand new activity with the default theme as well. We don't have any content here since we haven't added anything to our web view. However, we can see that we're starting a new activity since it doesn't have our bottom navigation view and has changed the label. Back over to Android Studio, we now just have one more activity we need to have before we really dig into creating the views that make up the UI. Back over in the project view in the activities, let's do this with the tooling once more. We'll go over and select activity, and from here we'll select an empty activity. We're going to call this our search activity, which is going to be started when we click on the search bar from the main activity. This is not a launcher activity as our main activity was. and is going to be backwards compatible with app compat. We'll select the package name and once again ensure that we have Kotlin set as a programming language, and then we'll hit finish. You can see that this does a very simple wire up, very similar to what we did manually. It even went ahead and added the updated activity to our manifest right below our recently created article detail activity. So now we have our 3 primary activities. This means that we can start creating our different layouts to complete the pages required by Wikipedia for the Explore, History, Favorites, Search, and Detail page. The first thing we're going to do is apply that new theme that we created at the beginning of the demo. This is simply apptheme.noActionBar, and once again we can use the autocomplete to help us out.